Welcome to 10 audio plot twists to fall asleep to. Settle in, close your eyes, and prepare for the unexpected. Let the stories begin. The train that never stops. Ethan collapsed into his seat on the last train of the night, rubbing his temples. The hum of the tracks beneath him was almost hypnotic. He barely noticed the only other passenger, a frail old man sitting across the aisle, staring out the window. He had a long day at work, and all he wanted was to get home. The train rumbled on. As Ethan glanced at his phone, he noticed something odd. The signal had vanished. No Wi-Fi, no bars. Just a blank screen. He sighed and looked out the window, but instead of familiar city streets, there was only fog. The train slowed at a dimly lit station. The doors didn't open. The old man turned to him. "We missed our stop." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "The train hasn't reached my station yet." The man shook his head. "No, not that stop. The stop that matters." A chill ran through Ethan. He tried to stand, but the train lurched forward, accelerating into a blur of darkness. The intercom crackled with a voice that sounded both mechanical and ancient. "Final destination, Midnight Hollow." Ethan's breath hitched. "This train isn't supposed to go anywhere called Midnight Hollow." The old man sighed. "That's what I thought too. At first." Panic surged through Ethan as he reached for the emergency brake. Nothing happened. He pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. His heart raced.
I just got on at Westbrook Station.
"This is the 11:45 train home." The old man watched him, eyes filled with something that looked like pity. "Son, what's the date today?" Ethan pulled out his wallet, fumbling for his train ticket. His fingers trembled as he read the date, 7 years ago. The memory crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had boarded this train before, on the same night, at the same station. But he never remembered getting off. "I don't understand," Ethan whispered. The man's voice was low. "This train only carries those who don't belong anywhere else. People who lost their way. People who never made it home." Ethan's stomach twisted. "But I'm alive. I was just at work." The train lights flickered. Outside the window, shifting shadows moved along the tracks. A figure stood on the next platform, dressed in an old-fashioned conductor's uniform, staring straight at Ethan. The train ground to a stop. The doors hissed open. A cold wind swept through the car. The conductor stepped forward, his hollow eyes locking onto Ethan. "Passenger 204, your time is up." Ethan backed away. "No, there's been a mistake." The old man gripped Ethan's wrist. "If you step off, you'll know the truth. If you stay, you'll forget again. And you'll ride this train forever." Ethan's chest tightened. His real last memory hit him all at once, crossing the train tracks, his headphones on, a blaring horn. Then nothing. He had died that night. But he had never left the train. The conductor extended a hand. The decision was his. Would he step off and face the truth? Or stay aboard the train that never stops? The portrait that painted itself. Mia never wanted the house. Her great-uncle, an eccentric painter, left it to her in his will, along with one rule: never finish the painting in the attic. She assumed it was just the ramblings of an old man. But when she moved in, she found it, a large, dust-covered canvas in the attic. The portrait of a faceless woman. For some reason, it unsettled her. Yet something about it drew her in. That night, she dreamed of painting it, her brush moving on its own, the woman's hollow face slowly taking form. She woke up in a cold sweat. The painting was no longer in the attic. It was in her bedroom. Mia's stomach lurched. She was certain she'd left it upstairs. The woman's face was still unfinished, but something was different. The lines were sharper. A faint smile curled at the edges of her lips. She shoved the painting back into the attic, covering it with a sheet. But the next morning, it was back in her room. And the woman's smile had grown. Mia's hands shook as she dug through her great-uncle's journals. One entry stood out: "She won't let me stop. Every time I try to leave her unfinished, she finds a way back. If I complete the painting, she takes a soul." Mia's breath hitched. The woman wasn't just part of the painting, she was inside it. And if the painting was finished, she would be free. That night, the house creaked with unfamiliar noises. A whispering voice drifted through the halls. "Finish me." Mia locked her bedroom door, but when she turned, the painting was inside the room with her. The woman's hollow eyes seemed to watch. She grabbed a knife and slashed the canvas. But instead of paint, a thick, black liquid oozed from the cut. The house shook. A shriek ripped through the air. Mia stumbled back as the painting ripped itself apart. The woman's twisted smile melted into a scream, before the portrait collapsed into nothing but an empty, rotting frame. Mia burned the remains of the painting in the fireplace, watching as the flames swallowed the cursed image. Finally, the whispers stopped. The house fell silent. Days passed. The air felt lighter, freer. The nightmare was over. Until one morning, Mia walked past the hallway mirror, and saw a faint, twisted smile on her reflection's face. The painting was gone. But had the woman truly left? The room that shouldn't exist. Lena had barely settled into her new apartment when she noticed something strange, the extra door at the end of the hall. It wasn't on the floor plan, and the landlord had brushed it off when she asked, claiming it was a locked supply closet, nothing to worry about. But every night, as the building fell silent, Lena would hear faint scratching sounds coming from inside. She convinced herself it was mice, but the noise was too steady, too deliberate. After a few weeks, she tried the handle. Locked. She knocked. No answer. But just as she turned away, she swore she heard something shift on the other side. That night, she woke up to a click. The door at the end of the hall had unlocked on its own. Heart pounding, she grabbed a flashlight and pushed it open, only to be met with a shocking sight. Inside was an exact replica of her bedroom. Same bed, same blanket, even the same half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. But the most horrifying part was the bed itself. Someone was sleeping in it. Not just someone. Her. She stepped forward in disbelief, and as she did, her sleeping double's eyes snapped open. But they weren't just open, they were staring directly at her. Panic surged through her as the other Lena's lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound came out, only a soft, distorted breath. She bolted from the room, slamming the door behind her, and locked it. But the scratching sound? It started again. This time, it was coming from her own side. The next morning, Lena convinced herself it had been a nightmare, but unease gnawed at her all day. That night, she cautiously approached the door again. It was locked, just as before. Maybe she'd imagined the whole thing? Feeling a rush of relief, she turned to walk back to her room. But then she froze. Her bedroom door was slightly open. She was sure she had closed it before bed. Slowly, she pushed it wider, her breath hitching in her throat. The bed was empty. The blanket was pulled back, the pillow slightly indented as if someone had been there. Something was wrong. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught movement, her mirror. Her reflection wasn't moving in sync with her. Instead, it was smiling. Terror rooted Lena to the floor as her reflection took a step toward the glass, toward her. She stumbled backward, crashing into her dresser. The impact knocked a framed photo to the floor, and as she bent down to pick it up, she noticed something horrifying. She wasn't in the picture anymore. Her hands trembled as she turned back to the mirror, only to find her reflection was gone. Then, behind her, a voice whispered, "Your turn." The closet door clicked open again. The room beyond was no longer a replica, it was dark, endless, waiting. A chill rushed through her as unseen hands grasped her wrists. She tried to scream, but the door slammed shut. In the morning, the landlord showed a new tenant around, casually mentioning the supply closet. It was locked, of course, and always would be. The man who answered the wrong call. David had never been a light sleeper, but when his phone rang at exactly 3:12 a.m., he jolted awake. The number was unknown, but something about it felt strangely familiar. He hesitated before answering, pressing the phone to his ear. "Hello?" At first, only static. Then, a low, distorted voice, "Finally. I found you." The call ended abruptly. Heart still racing, David checked his call log, but there was no record of the call ever happening. He tried shaking it off as a dream, but the next night, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, the voice was clearer. "Listen carefully," it said. "Whatever you do, don't go outside." The line went dead. His blood ran cold. He wasn't planning to go outside, but now he felt watched. Slowly, he pulled back the curtain to peek outside. His breath caught in his throat. A man was standing beneath the streetlight, staring directly at his window. But something about him was wrong. His features were blurry, shifting, like an old VHS tape struggling to come into focus. David's phone vibrated again. A new message, "You already let me in." He turned, his bedroom door was open, a cold chill swept through the room. He wasn't alone. The shadows along the walls twisted, lengthening unnaturally. His phone buzzed with another message, "Look behind you." His breath hitched. He refused. His whole body locked up, paralyzed with fear. Then, a creak. The floorboards behind him shifted. His hand clenched the bedsheet as he forced himself to turn. Nothing. His room was empty. But the door to his apartment wasn't. It was wide open. Heart hammering, he grabbed his phone, ready to call 911, but the screen only showed 2 words. Wrong number. The lights flickered. A hum filled the air, deep and droning, like static pressing against his skull. He backed away, but the moment his foot crossed the threshold of his room, the world tilted. Suddenly, he wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was standing outside. The streetlight above him buzzed. Across the street, through the window of his apartment, he saw himself. His own body was inside, standing by the bed, holding the phone, a blank expression on his face. David's phone vibrated again. He looked down at the screen, his stomach twisting. Don't answer the next call. The light overhead flickered again. When it came back on, the figure inside turned to face him. And smiled. The house that waited. Emily inherited an old countryside house from a distant relative she had never met, a place she had never visited, yet it felt strangely familiar from the moment she stepped inside. The furniture was perfectly arranged despite years of supposed abandonment, and the air carried the scent of something recently disturbed. That first night, as she settled into bed, soft murmurs echoed through the halls, whispering her name. Every time she followed the sounds, the rooms were empty, but the whispering never stopped, it simply moved whenever she did. Searching the attic the next morning, she stumbled upon an antique chest filled with photographs. Her hands trembled as she pulled them out, each image revealing a different woman identical to her, dressed in period clothing from various decades, 1920s, 1850s, even the 1700s. The dates stretched back for centuries. A chill ran down her spine as she flipped the last photograph over, finding the words, "You were here before. You will be here again." Determined to uncover the truth, she called a local historian, who gasped upon hearing the name of the estate. "That's Lockwood Manor," he said. "Every firstborn daughter in the family has vanished there. None have ever left." Panicking, Emily ran to the front door, only to find that it was gone. A solid wall now stood where it had been. Every window was bricked over, every possible exit erased. The whispers grew louder, no longer just her name but commands, insistent and relentless. "Come back. Come back. Come back." She turned to flee, only to see the house shifting, its wooden beams creaking like muscles tightening. The walls pulsed, as if alive. She dashed upstairs, heart pounding, and flung open the attic window to escape, but her own reflection in the glass stopped her cold. It wasn't her. It was her, but older. A frail, ghostly version of herself with sunken eyes and a knowing smile. She gasped, stepping back, and the reflection mirrored her movements, laughing softly. The whispers crescendoed into screams as the house's walls began closing in, shadows stretching like grasping hands. It all made sense now. This wasn't a home, it was a trap, a thing that devoured time itself. Emily had never inherited the house. She had always belonged to it. The man in the static. Jake had always needed the TV on to sleep, the static filling the room with a comforting hum. It had been a habit since childhood, drowning out the emptiness of his apartment. But one night, something changed. He woke to find the screen staring back at him. A figure shifted within the static, a dark silhouette moving closer. The remote was nowhere to be found, and his stomach twisted when he realized the TV wasn't even plugged in. Then the voice came. A distorted whisper, crackling through the speakers. "I see you." Jake scrambled out of bed, his breath coming fast, but when he turned to the mirror across the room, his reflection was gone. Instead, the shadow inside the screen mimicked his every move, tilting its head, raising its arm, testing him. He reached toward the screen, trembling, and the shadow did the same. The static pulsed, flickering faster, then the shadow stepped forward. Jake tried to run, but his body wouldn't move. The screen went black, and in that instant, everything flipped. He blinked and found himself standing inside the television. The glow of his own bedroom stretched out before him, but it was just out of reach, separated by a thin, impenetrable wall of glass. He pounded against it, screaming for help, but no sound came out. He turned, searching for a way out, but there was nothing. Just static. Endless static. Then, he saw it, someone was sitting on his bed. A figure, his own body. It smiled, watching him through the glass, reaching for the remote. "Your turn," it whispered. The TV screen blinked off, and Jake's world went dark. When he woke again, he wasn't in his apartment, he was inside a different TV, flickering in some stranger's living room. A new person lay asleep on the couch. The static hummed, waiting, watching. The moment their eyes opened, Jake knew, the cycle was starting again. The house at the end of the street. No one lived in the old house at the end of the street, but every night at exactly 2:33 a.m., a single light would flicker on in the upstairs window. It had been abandoned for years, its peeling paint and boarded up windows making it an eyesore, but that didn't stop the local kids from daring each other to get close. No one had ever knocked on the door. No one had ever tried to go inside, until Liam moved in next door. The first few nights, he ignored the stories, chalking the flickering light up to electrical issues. But on the fourth night, something changed. The light turned on and stayed on. Curiosity gnawed at him. The house had no power, so how was it still glowing? On impulse, Liam walked over. The front porch groaned beneath his weight, the old wood damp and rotting. He hesitated before turning the doorknob, and to his surprise, it opened easily. Inside, the air was thick with dust, yet something felt recently disturbed. A strange warmth clung to the walls, and despite years of supposed abandonment, there was no cobwebs, no decay. He ventured further, heart pounding, until he saw it, the staircase leading to the lit room. As he climbed, each step creaked loudly in the silence. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling out. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. The room was frozen in time. An untouched bed, old toys scattered on the floor, a thick layer of dust on the desk, but on that desk, a notebook with his name on it. Liam's hands trembled as he reached for it. He flipped open the cover, his heart hammering harder with each line he read. It was his life. Every moment, every thought, everything that had ever happened to him was written inside. But the entry stopped at that very night. The last words read, "Liam is about to open the closet door." His breath hitched. He turned slowly. The closet door was slightly ajar. A soft breath escaped from the darkness inside. A shape shifted. Panic gripped him, but before he could move, a whisper floated out from the closet. "You were supposed to stay." A hand slid out from the shadows, pale and thin, fingers curling around the doorframe. Liam bolted. He flew down the stairs, desperate to get out, but as he reached the front door, something stopped him cold. The neighborhood was gone. The street, his house, everything, replaced by an endless forest, stretching on forever. The house groaned around him, and a realization crashed into him like a wave. He wasn't visiting this house. He had never left. A soft creak made him turn. At the top of the stairs stood a boy. A boy with his exact face. A younger version of himself, watching with empty eyes. "You came back," the boy whispered. The air thickened, the walls seemed to breathe. Liam staggered backward as the younger him smiled. The walls began closing in, shadows stretching toward him. The truth was clear now, he had been here before. The light had never been a warning. It had been a signal. And now, it was his turn to wait. The elevator that skipped a floor. Maya worked late in a towering high-rise, often the last one to leave. The building had 18 floors, and she had taken the elevator down to the lobby countless times without a second thought. But one night, after staying later than usual, she stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby. And the elevator went up. She frowned. The panel was unlit. None of the floors were selected, yet the numbers kept climbing. 17. 18. 19. Her stomach dropped. There was no 19th floor. The building only had 18. The elevator stopped with a soft ding, and the doors slid open. Maya hesitated. The hallway beyond was wrong. Dim lighting flickered overhead. The walls were lined with old wallpaper, faded and peeling. The air smelled stale, like dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. She knew she shouldn't step out. She knew she should hit the close button. But at the far end of the hall, something moved. A figure. Standing still. Facing away from her. Then, in slow, unnatural movements, it began walking backward into the shadows. Before she could scream, the elevator doors began closing on their own. She lunged for the panel, jabbing at any button, desperate to go back. But just before the doors sealed shut, a hand reached in, the elevator plummeted. The lights flickered. The air turned ice cold. Maya gripped the railing, her pulse hammering in her ears. Then, suddenly, ding. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open again. She stumbled out into the lobby. Or at least, it looked like the lobby. The receptionist was still at her desk, the security guard still standing at his usual spot. But something was off. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. She stepped forward hesitantly, glancing around, and then, the receptionist snapped her head up. Her black, empty eyes locked onto Maya. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. The security guard twitched, his neck jerking at an unnatural angle. Maya turned to flee, but the elevator doors were already closing. She barely managed to shove her arm through before they shut completely, pressing every button in blind panic. The elevator lurched, rising faster and faster, the numbers blinking erratically. 20. 25. 30. The buttons went dark. Only one number remained lit, 0. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open. This time, there was no office, no lobby, only an endless hallway stretching into darkness. And at the far end, something waited. The air around her shifted, and a whisper crawled up her spine, "You were never supposed to leave." The doors slammed shut behind her. The numbers on the panel flickered one last time before vanishing completely. She had never left the elevator. It had just taken her somewhere else. The hotel room that didn't exist. Daniel had been driving all night through the pouring rain when he finally spotted a motel, the Pinecrest Inn. It wasn't listed on his GPS, but exhaustion clouded his judgment. The lobby was dimly lit, the receptionist an older woman with hollow eyes who barely spoke as she slid a key across the counter. "Room 306, she muttered. Daniel thanked her and climbed the creaky stairs to the third floor. The hallway smelled wrong, like mildew and something metallic. His key fit perfectly, and inside, the room was ordinary. A bed, a nightstand, an old TV playing static. He shut the door, tossed his bag onto the chair, and collapsed onto the mattress. At exactly 3:06 a.m., a knock rattled the door. He jolted awake. "Housekeeping," a monotone voice called. Confused, he checked the time. It was the middle of the night. Who does housekeeping at 3 a.m.? He stayed silent, but the knocking came again, louder. "Sir, we need to clean the room." Daniel's stomach twisted. Slowly, he approached the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No staff. No movement. But the knocking kept going. He held his breath as he reached for the doorknob. Just before he could turn it, the knocking stopped. And then, he heard it. A voice, whispering from inside the room. Whipping around, Daniel searched the room. Nothing. The bathroom was empty, the closet too. But the TV screen, still flickering static, now had words forming in the distortion. "Look under the bed." His pulse thundered in his ears. Slowly, he crouched and lifted the bedspread, and saw a pair of eyes staring back. A figure crawled out. It was him. An exact replica of himself, grinning wide, eyes hollow. Daniel stumbled back as his other self rose to his feet, tilting his head. "You took my room," the doppelganger whispered. Daniel bolted for the door, wrenching it open, only to find himself standing in the motel lobby. But something was wrong. The receptionist looked up, her face blurred, shifting. Behind her, the old TV flickered, showing a grainy security feed of his motel room. The screen zoomed in on the bed, on a figure lying beneath it, waiting. The receptionist smiled. "You should have checked out sooner." The man in the photos. Rachel loved thrift shopping, always drawn to forgotten trinkets and old books, but one day, she found something different, an old Polaroid camera with a single picture still inside. The photo showed a man standing in an empty field, facing away. Intrigued, she bought the camera, but when she got home, she noticed something strange. The man in the photo had moved. He was no longer facing away. He was turned slightly to the side. Confused, she dismissed it as her imagination, placed the photo on her desk, and went to bed. The next morning, he had turned fully toward her. She swore he hadn't been like that before. His face was still obscured, but the shift was undeniable. He was looking at her now. Heart pounding, she flipped the photo over, hoping for some explanation, but found only 5 words scrawled on the back: "Do not take another picture." Chills ran down her spine. That night, unable to shake the unease, she tucked the photo away in a drawer. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., a soft click echoed in her room, the sound of a Polaroid being taken. Rachel bolted upright. The drawer where she had hidden the photo was now open. Slowly, she approached it. A new Polaroid sat inside, this one showing her own bedroom. The perspective was from inside her closet. She turned toward the closet door, which was now slightly ajar. Trembling, she inched forward, hand shaking as she reached for the handle. She yanked it open, nothing. Empty. But as she turned back toward her desk, her blood ran cold. The man in the original Polaroid was gone. The field was empty. Panic surged through her. She grabbed the camera, determined to destroy it, but as her finger brushed the shutter, another photo ejected. She hesitated, dread pooling in her stomach. Slowly, she lifted the new picture. It showed her. From behind. Someone was standing directly behind her. A cold breath brushed her neck. She turned, and the camera flashed. Thank you for listening to 10 audio plot twists to fall asleep to, where the unexpected unfolds in every tale. If you enjoyed these stories, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more mind-bending narratives. Sleep well. And may your dreams be free of unexpected endings. Until next time.